Alright, so this is going to be a very brief overview of how to play Napoleonic Wars, 2nd edition. I'm going to use the Vassal module here for the 1st edition, so there might be some inconsistencies with the rulebook and with the placement of some of these locations and duchies, but it doesn't really matter. So the goal of the game generally is you will be playing or you will be starting the game as either part of the Imperial camp, which currently is occupied only by, as you can see in here, by France and by Spain, or the coalition camp, which will be occupied by Britain, Austria, and Russia. At the start of the game, the Imperial camp, you can see there's a Spanish marker here. I just put a control marker just to indicate that the Spanish are in the Imperial camp. That is because France starts with the Spanish in a pact situation between the two. All the other minor nations that exist, and the minor nations are the Turks, the Swedish, the Danish, and Prussia in a 4-player game possibly. It starts as a no. Prussia is not a minor nation, but it does start as neutral as well, which is why the setup here is for the 4-player game. So you can see Prussia is here under the unaligned column, and so are the Turks, whereas Denmark and Sweden both start as proxy clients of both France and Britain. So you don't really need to know much about that, but just know that you'll start at one of either of these camps, and the goal of the game is essentially at the end of each year there's going to be some kind of a peace roll to see whether the war has ended, and whoever come at the top at the end of the peace roll, whenever peace is enacted, is the winner. The victory points that you're basically looking after are those on the map. If you look on the map, let's just take Austria here for example. You can see there's all these locations here are duchies. You can see that there's circular ones, they're just regular duchies, and there's square ones, they are key duchies. The capital, Vienna, is also a key duchy. There are also these kind of, I don't know, it's a star-shaped duchies. They are essentially fortresses. They also give victory points. So essentially they are also considered keys. So essentially the squares and the stars are both keys, and that's essentially what you're trying to control. As you control more keys, your key status here increases. For example, France starts with 13 keys, and if it conquers 2 other keys, essentially those square and star duchies, then they will essentially be 2 victory points ahead of what they started. Other things that give you victory points: if you have any minor nation that you have a pact with, for example, France has a pact with Spain, that is another victory point for each one. And the last way to get victory points is any resources, and we'll touch upon resources a bit later. You can see all 4 nations, France, Russia, Britain, and Austria, all begin the game with 1 resource. You can cash in resources essentially for cards, but if you cash them in for cards, then you lose the resource, and the resource also counts as a victory point. So that's the 3 victory points: resources, extra keys ahead of what you started with, and how many minor allies you actually had. And so at the end of every turn there's going to be a peace roll. If peace is enacted due to this roll, then the nation that basically came on top is the winner. In case of ties, it's going to be the nation who is the last on this movement track, essentially a turn track, and the nations that are the last in here. So if there's a tie between Russia and France, Russia is going to win the game. So that's essentially how you win this game. Now, the game essentially is played by playing cards in essentially impulses. Every nation, starting with France, will have an impulse where they play a card from a hand that they start with, and all nations actually start with a different number of cards. The cards that they start with is based on the number of keys that they own. So keys are also important not just for victory points, keys are also important for cards. So if you can see here, I'm just juggling a little bit here. If you can have a look, you can see that France has 15, sorry, it didn't start with 15 keys. France has 13 keys, and so the number of cards that they have every turn is half the number of keys they have. So at the start of the game, they begin with 6 cards. It's obviously rounded down. So every nation will have its own cards, even neutral nations, and you can see here some of the neutral ones like Prussia, the Ottomans. I've got here Denmark and Sweden. They also start with cards, not many, because they don't have many keys. They are very small countries. But they do start with cards. However, until they actually join one of the other nations, one of the other players as an ally, you don't actually get to control their cards. They will basically be flipped and automatically be played. Usually they will just keep building units until a player actually takes control of that ally by establishing a pact with that ally. And once that happens, you will actually have some decision making and some control over how they play the cards. But until that happens, they're just going to play more and more units, build more and more units, basically blindly. We'll get to that a little bit later. It's not that important for now. So that's the gist of the game. Now, as you can see, there's a couple of different types of duchies here on the map. So we'll just take France is actually a better example to take than Austria. And you can see these are the normal duchies. Like I said, these square ones are the key duchies, which are part of the victory points and also part of how many cards you start with. But, and I don't know if France has a fortress here somewhere, but I'm sure there is. But you can kind of have a look and you can see that the colors here are a little bit different. So duchies that are just one color, like Picardy or Champagne or Orléans, they are essentially home duchies. So France starts with them at the start of the game, and they are the most important duchies for France. This is essentially France proper. Other duchies such as Nassau, Franconia, Ratisbon, Württemberg, Zurich, Munich, etc., they're called associated duchies, which means France starts with them controlled at the start of the game, and you can see because the bottom half is French, blue, and that indicates that they start at the start of the game under French control, but they are not completely totally within the French sphere of influence. That's why the top one is white. So there might be some other kind of people living there or whatnot, and so they're not fully French locations. However, because they still have a blue bottom, French can still build units there. And that is what the importance of the color is. They are allowed to build units there. If you took something like Brussels or Antwerp or the Vendée, we can have a look that it's half blue, half red. Because the bottom half is blue, it still starts as a French-controlled duchy. However, and the French can build units there, of course. However, if the British ever manage to put their control marker there, and we can have a look here, there's a British control marker. So for example, the British put a control marker on Brussels. If they are able to do that, they are essentially allowed to, these control markers, by the way, are called flags. So if they are able to flag Brussels, then they will be allowed to build British units there. If, for example, Austria flags Brussels, well, they control this key, so Austria will get a victory point for that. It will count as a victory point for them, which is good, but they will not be able to build units there because Austria can only build units at duchies that have the Austrian color, either full color home duchies or associate duchies as the bottom color, or a dual associated duchies, but I don't believe that Austria has any dual associated duchies. unlike the French and the British, for example, for whom Brussels is a dual associated duchy. So how does the game play essentially? So these duchies are important for building units, as I showed just a moment ago, but the game is played in impulses, and essentially you will play a card either for its operation value or CP, I think it's called command points or something rather, or you will play the card for the event, assuming that the event is playable. Some events have a marker on them that says, let's see if I can find something for you. I do not believe I have anything here. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure because this is a first edition module, so I'm not sure those are even the same cards that come with the second edition. But some cards will actually say cannot be played in 1805, which is the first turn.